Today I'm going to talk about whether you need money to be happy.
Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher.
So, I want to talk about, my friend Ed Latimore has an interesting tweet that he puts up from time to time. And I forget exactly, he first put it up in like 2019. So, as usual, I'm being extremely timely here on this channel. And so his tweet was, "How brainwashed must you be to believe that more money doesn't make you happier?" I'm not talking about going from 6 to 7 figures. I'm talking from the poverty line to the middle class, from food stamps to fine dining, from EBT to BTC. EBT being, I can't remember, electronic something or other, but it's a assistance program for people with very little money, and BTC being Bitcoin. And then be poor for a while, then don't be, then talk. Now, one interesting thing, Ed tends to describe himself along Stoic lines. Often I think Stoic street smarts or something like that is often his tagline. But this is really more Aristotelian than it is Stoic. The Stoics, in general, painting with a very broad brush here, described happiness as the result of virtue. And so to be happy, you had to be virtuous, and you don't require money to be virtuous. There is disagreement about whether money might help you to be virtuous or money might hinder you to be virtuous. There's some who even taught that like voluntarily being poor was actually helpful in developing virtue, whereas some argued the reverse. But this is really more, obviously, like I'm reading a bit into the tweet, but from how Ed generally talks in his positions on things, I think this is what he meant. And if not, then this is in any event an interesting subject, because really I'm as much concerned with Aristotle as Ed's tweet here. The Aristotelian view of happiness was more or less along the lines of fulfilling your telos. And to some degree, this is what people generally held. But the Stoics went in the direction this required fulfilling of moral virtue more than anything else, because the Stoics, to some degree, on some level, they saw that the world was broken, and there's a reason why Stoicism has been described a little bit as like Christianity without Christ. So on some level, the Stoics intuited that the world is broken, and therefore you have to pick and choose, and you have to pick the most important part of your telos, because you can't actually fulfill all of it. Aristotle was no fool and isn't going to conclude that everything works perfectly. But at the same time, his view was a lot more along the lines of like all of your telos would have to be fulfilled to be happy. So simply many people could not be happy. And your telos involved all of the natural animal functions as well as the higher functions, the moral functions and so on of the human being. And so for Aristotle, you needed a certain amount of wealth in order to be happy, because you needed a certain amount of wealth in order to fulfill your animal telos. Now, you would be miserable if you just stopped there. If you just, tried to pretend you were a rabbit who had an awful lot of carrots, you would not be happy. So, Aristotle didn't have a conception like that, but that you had to fulfill those layers and also have things like friendships with other people in order to be, to really be happy, so that you need friends in order to do philosophy with and so on. So you needed all of these layers fulfilled in order to actually be happy. Otherwise, you would be lacking in things and therefore not happy. And it's pretty straightforward as far as it goes. It does make sense. And there is a certain amount of truth to it. It's not the complete truth, and that's really what I'm going to talk about. But you first have to understand that as far as it goes, it's not wrong. On a purely natural level, yes, you actually do have to be naturally fulfilled in order to be happy. Otherwise, you will be lacking, and lacking goods that you are supposed to have, that your nature has been built to have, is going to be unhappiness. But now, I could do this a lot faster if I was going the Christian route, by the way. So, for those who are wondering, like, why don't you just, bring in, straightforward Catholic doctrine and be done with it? There wouldn't be a video to make if I just did that. It would just be too obvious, and therefore not helpful. You can just go read doctrine if that'll do it for you much faster than you'll get anything from a video of mine. However, you can also see this in another route, because here's the thing. money, everybody knows money does not automatically bring happiness. You can live comfortably in a nice house with fine dining and invest in Bitcoin, to borrow at least part of Ed's list here, and be unhappy. And everyone knows this. It's possible to do these things and still be miserable. You could, for example, just spend all your time getting in arguments on Twitter and want everybody to like you, and you will never have everybody like you. So the mere fact that you eat good meals in between, you can be sitting there on your phone, furiously typing away at all the people who are wrong on the internet, trying to force them to see things the same way you do and to like you, and to sort of be congruent with you, while you're eating extremely well-cooked food, and you will be unhappy. There's a reason, of course, why Ed makes his money actually teaching people about essentially paths to happiness and teaching people how to do things like how to communicate effectively. And he's got other messages about, like, don't read the news, because approximately all this stuff is outside of your control. So all you're going to do is make yourself unhappy and enrich the people selling the news. You're not going to do yourself any good at all. So clearly you can have money and be unhappy. Okay. So, now that means that if you, merely having money isn't going to bring the happiness. You need the skill to be happy. So the question then comes up, because that in itself doesn't do it. It kind of gets you part of the way there, but you could very easily say, okay, yes, you need the skill to be happy. You need to orient your life. You need to build those habits and virtues, habitus, habitus virtus. Okay, I'm sorry. Forget that digression. Okay, I was going to go an etymological digression, but never mind. Let's just go straight forward. You could answer that, like, yes, you need to develop the appropriate habits and strengthen your virtues to be happy, but these things still need a fuel, and that fuel basically is money. You're going to need the money in order to have, but it's not, strictly speaking, money. It's the things that money can buy. But you need the things that money can buy in order to be happy, because the happiness, all these virtues, need a fuel on which to feed upon, that in order to actually be able to be present with the food and to enjoy the food instead of being distracted by some fight, you need food there in order to be able to pay attention to it instead of the fight. It's not going to do you any good if you have no food that you can pay attention to the food that you don't have. Okay, so that answer is very possible, and again, so far as it goes, it works. So bear with me, because get a little, we're going to get there. Okay, so you need the habits. You need the habits that actually support things. But here's the problem with even the food portion of it. Basically, the problem that you find, and this is easier the older you get, is that you get bored with everything. Good food is nice, but you get bored with it. And good company is a somewhat different matter, because you don't really get bored of good company per se. Although even there, everything you come to know, like basically novelty doesn't really work. See, it gets where this is coming from, and where a lot of this, where the mistake comes from, is the belief that if you can have a constant source of novelty, if you can always be learning new things, then you will be happy. And here's the thing. That doesn't work. It takes a while to find out experientially that doesn't work. And learning is good, so don't get me wrong about that. I do certainly advocate continuing to learn. The problem is the more you learn, the better you get at it, and the less learning is itself novelty. Now, you can always be getting new facts, right? You can always read a history book about somebody or other and find some new group of people who did specific things that are different than other groups of people did, but well, they're kind of going to be like them. They're going to recognize patterns. And basically, it's the same thing that makes it easier for you to pick up skills, the more skills you have learned, is the same thing that takes away a lot of the novelty from learning these skills. And as I said, it takes a while to get to this point. But, like, get good at some form of dancing. And it will be easier to pick up all the other forms. Every now and again, okay, there's some asterisks. Every now and again, there'll be certain things you do in one form of dancing that, like, you will have to untrain yourself for another form of dancing. And so, it can actually, in certain cases, like, learn this type, it'll make it harder to do that type, because, like, this type is real bouncy and this other type is very smooth. And so you need to, like, train yourself out of the habit of bouncing on all your steps. Or, the reverse, that, like, you've learned how to glide and now you need to actually bounce when you step. And, okay, so there's things like that. But that said, learn a form of dancing, others become easier. Learn 2 forms of dancing, and the rest become much easier. Learn 3 forms of dancing, and new forms of dancing tend to become pretty easy. And this is kind of the reason why, actually, when you see people who are really experts and have got, like, 5 styles, they're practically at the point where they can just, like, watch somebody do some new style and then just start doing it pretty well right there, simply because they have learned so many different types, they can pick it up. Or again, people who play 5 or 6 different kinds of instruments have a tendency to be able to pick up a 6th or 7th instrument pretty fast. Why? Well, because, it's like some of this and some of this mixed in with some of that, and basically it's like those skills recombined in this way, and then you just have to learn some specifics about, like, the actual differences in between. But, like, if you're pressing down on a string, or you're holding down holes, or you're pressing keys or whatever, well, if you've already learned how to do those things and you've learned how that, the different ways they respond, the new one's not that different. And on and on. And this is the thing, like, meet people who are really, really good at things, and what you'll find is they pick up stuff really fast. And why? Why do they pick up stuff really fast? It's because, well, there's only so much new under the sun. And there are a lot of variations, but over time, you get to learn them all. And so that very same thing, which is phenomenally useful, incidentally, that makes you good at picking up new things, that makes it much faster for you to pick up new things because you can relate them to the things you already know, removes a lot of the novelty from it. That when you're good, no, it is the case, by the way, that somebody who knows how to play 7 instruments may well have a habit of picking up an 8th instrument, a 9th instrument, a 10th instrument, just for fun. Like, every now and again, I'm going to just take a break, I'll learn this new instrument. It'll be fun to just do that for a little while. But the thing is, it doesn't supply that fun for nearly as long as learning their first instrument supplied them with a learning experience. Like everything. You get used to it, and the hits wear off. So, by the way, I'm still, for those who can sort of see where I'm going, I'm still not there yet. There are going to be other pieces that need to come in. But so the thing is, the skill that you need to develop is the ability to appreciate a good that you already know. If you want to be happy long term, the answer is not constant new hits of things. It's not constant novelty, because even novelty ceases to be new. Eventually, you get used to novelty just as you get used to everything else. And there truly is not enough variation under the sun to, like, actually constantly have a stream of new things, because you will start to recognize stuff. The more you know, the more you will recognize things as variations on things you already have encountered in some form or other. Because this world has a tremendous amount of variety, it doesn't have a tremendous amount of completely unrelated things. So, it's not novelty. I mean, unless you die really young. I mean, then, you can be entertained, your whole life if your life ends really fast. But, talk to people in their 80s who haven't wasted their lives, who didn't spend, most of their waking hours that they weren't working in front of a television. And one of the things that you'll find is, like, they don't get surprised by all that much. That they pick up new things, they learn new stuff, but, like, part of the reason you find very few people taking up new hobbies in their 80s, it is not that they get tired. I mean, plenty of them do, but, of the people who don't, like, you will find people who are very active, who are, really do a lot of stuff, but they don't tend to pick up new things. Well, and it's kind of for 2 reasons, to be fair. One of those reasons is why be not very good at this when I can be very good at this other thing, which is kind of, which is very similar. It's actually why I spent years taking lessons in Lindy Hop and getting good at Lindy Hop. Not great, just good. But, never going to win Lindy Hop competitions, but, on the other hand, like, fairly good. for that lower, solidly at the top of that lower tier, right? Where the really good people are up here, and like I'm not in their class, but like I'm fairly good. Okay, I started learning for fun. I started learning Argentine tango, and one of the things that made it difficult is why be not very good at Argentine tango when I can just go be very good at Lindy Hop right now. Like, I've got this much time in which I can spend on entertainment because, I have to work and other stuff. So why do it here, just not being very good when it's a lot more fun to be good at Lindy Hop than it is to not be good at Argentine tango? And yeah, I mean, if I put a bunch of effort into it, I could learn to be good at Argentine tango and then enjoy that too. But like, why? And this gets to the other part though. And the other answer is that, well, yeah, I mean, I could, but it's not that different. Like there isn't really anything in Argentine tango that like you don't really find the same thing expressed differently. Different expression, very different expression, but like you have that same sort of partner to partner communication within it, and you're not really gonna find that much in the one that you won't find in the other, just in a different expression. If you're good at appreciating these things, like, yeah, I can work a long time to find the same thing I already have, just a bit differently. And why? That actually comes up a lot when you talk to older people who are still very active, who don't just, who aren't just sitting around watching the television waiting to die, basically. But people who are actually active and have hobbies and do things, but are older, like they don't tend to pick up new ones because the new ones don't really offer them very much. They already have what these other things have to offer. It looks different, but get into it for a while and you'll see the similarities. This is the thing. The continual novelty doesn't work unless you're planning to die really young. And I'm going to get to that actually separately in a little bit because that's kind of the last piece of it, the fact that everyone's going to die. So the real key here is you have to become good at appreciating a good that you already know. If you want to be happy over the long term, you need to be able to look at something that is good and still appreciate its goodness, not just because it surprised you out of novelty, but because you can appreciate the goodness that is in front of you. And this is much harder. This takes a lot more work. It takes more work to keep yourself so that you don't need something to be fresh in order to appreciate it to its full. Now, like, oh, I've seen that before. Who cares? That is a lazy reaction. What's going on there, when you see some goodness, when you're looking at the beauty, heck, pick the beauty of a tree. You look at the tree, you see that it's beautiful. You haven't seen this tree before. It's like, wow, that is beautiful. I mean, look at all those leaves. It's gorgeous. And then it's not new. But it's still just the same thing it was a minute ago. You not appreciating it because you've been looking at it for a bit is not the tree changing. It now requires more effort for you to appreciate the goodness of this tree because you don't have the aid of novelty helping you out. What's going on here is not that you have so much experience that the world is failing to please you. It's that you're weak. It's that you were too weak to enjoy the thing that you have already enjoyed. And when it was just new, when the first moment you saw it and you're taken aback and you didn't have to put any effort into this because the novelty of surprise kind of made you open your eyes and stimulated you. You got, essentially, metaphorically speaking, a rush of adrenaline that helped you to do what you could not otherwise do. But once that metaphorical adrenaline runs off, now your weakness takes over and you cease to appreciate the thing because you don't have the mental ability to focus on something that isn't new, to focus on the goodness in front of you without it being a novel thing. And there is something of an analogy to this, like in weightlifting. When people are going for really maximal efforts, and by the way, this is not a criticism, I'm sorry, lifting weights, because weightlifting is actually a name for a particular kind of lifting weights, or sometimes called the Olympic lifts. Anyway, I don't mean just that, I mean lifting of weights. And especially in like powerlifting, you'll see people who do things like smell ammonia. And you'll have other variants too, where like you'll have people where like somebody like slaps them on the shoulders, or there's this one great one I saw. It's this huge, I think Russian, is some sort of Eastern European guy, this little woman who like came up to here on him. And then he like hulked over to her and bent down, and then she just slapped him in the face over and over and over again. And then like after like 5 seconds of just slapping him in the face, he then like got up and walked over angry and went and did the lift. And what is all that doing, whether it's ammonia or getting hit or whatever? These are triggering adrenaline responses. Ammonia's maybe slightly different, I forget. It is stimulating your body. So, I mean, it is a demonstration of what your muscles and bones and tendons and so on are capable of. So it's not false in that sense. Like pushing yourself to the utter limit, flooding your body with the hormones that make you, that unlock the various things that are basically normal safety mechanisms that are there to keep you from doing stuff like ripping the muscle off your bone. Because in general, your muscles are strong enough to do that. The attachment points of your tendons usually are not as strong as the actual muscle itself if you were to truly stimulate the muscle to pull with 100% of everything that it has. And so you have various built-in safety mechanisms to keep you from tearing your muscles up and ripping them off the bones and so on. And you also have your body also has the ability to recognize when that doesn't really matter very much, which is normally supposed to be that like a jaguar is trying to eat you, and at this point you just need to make it stop trying to eat you. It doesn't matter whether or not you injure yourself in the process, because if you're jaguar food, you're even more injured. And so you now unlock your muscles and you can hit as hard as your body is physically capable of, and you may be able to break bone in the jaguar, hopefully, that you could not do normally with all your safety mechanisms intact. That when you're just carrying stuff around, you don't want to take the risk of, damaging yourself tremendously. But like if you're about to die, okay, turn off all the safety mechanisms, do everything you possibly can, because like it's not going to, the alternative is it doesn't matter anyway. So either way, it really is irrelevant. So just go with everything you have. Same basic thing happens there. But the thing is, although it is interesting to a degree that in powerlifting, like when a person pushes themselves to the utter limit, when they're huffing ammonia to get this to get this like counter reaction where they're triggering their body into the fight or flight, where they unlock all their mechanisms and have surges of blood flow, and like your muscles at this point are willing to rip themselves off the bone because like you've triggered that fight or flight, that like last ditch save ourselves sort of thing. It is fascinating to see like how much force can a human being generate under this condition. But it's not very representative of anything. Like if a person can bench press 535 pounds under like this maximal condition where they're willing to they've made the decision, they're going to go for it, they're going to put several weeks of recovery afterwards, they have trained and peaked up to this, they're huffing ammonia to get their body ready to rip itself apart so they can do the absolute maximal effort. Okay, I mean, it is impressive and it's really cool, but at the same time, if you have something you need pushed up and it weighs 530 pounds, this is not the person to ask. You want somebody who can do this under normal conditions, like this is their training weight, like they do many reps at this weight. That's the person to go ask. And similarly, like, you want the person to do that. Deadlifting is more practical than bench press. But you need something picked up. Find somebody who deadlifts that as like, ideally as a warm up, but like at least as reps, not as like their contest weight, because there's a good chance they can't if it's their contest weight on a normal day. This is just a every rare sort of thing. So my point in all of this is to try to vividly bring home that the exceptional stuff is kind of interesting, but it's not a really good measure of the strength of a person because you can't pull it out very often. If you can be very interested in something, but only under the right set of circumstances when everything aligns and you haven't seen any of this before and it's presented in just the right way, okay, you're not very good at appreciating stuff. Like, yeah, like under those ideal circumstances, everything is going right. Man, can you be fascinated by it? But like, your ability to actually pay attention is not so good if you need all of this support to help you out. So this is where, in happiness, you need to develop this skill of being able to appreciate goods that you already have. Here's the thing, though. The goods that you already have, there's some details on the things that are, some details about food, okay? But, and things that are consumable like food. But the stuff that you already have, you don't need more money for because you already have it. So here's the thing. If you develop this skill, which is necessary in order to be happy with money over the long term, it's not a skill that depends on money. You Because if you're good at appreciating goods you already have, you don't have to pay money for new stuff. You can keep on appreciating those goods if you have developed this skill. So you don't actually require money to be happy in this way. Now, there is the other thing about consumables. Now, actually, and here again, something interestingly, Ed himself has brought up, something Ed had mentioned that, like, people will pay enormous amounts for an education at a university, but going to a library is free. Public libraries, that is. There aren't many private libraries anymore, outside of like the books that people own in their own homes. But there used to be private lending libraries. Actually, were the first libraries like this, and then eventually you get public lending libraries. But anyway, there are also non-lending libraries. I don't want to get lost in the weeds here, just in case you didn't know. Anyway, but you can go to the public library without any money, and oh man, are there a lot of books there. And kind of similarly, there's an awful lot of beauty. Find your nearest Catholic church that was built before the 1960s, roughly, if it wasn't stripped down, or many of them more recently as they're becoming redecorated, and you will see some beautiful art and sculpture and colors and so on. And there are a lot of other places too. Or just go outside and look at trees. Trees are amazingly beautiful things if you're willing to pay attention to them. So they're actually, sunrises, sunsets, clouds, mountains, fields, birds that are just wandering by. There actually turns out to be an enormous amount of stuff you do not have to pay for that is good and you can appreciate the goodness of. Which just brings us to basically food. Actually, there is another thing related to food. This brings you to food, and yeah, okay. And here's the thing about food. So, like, yes, you need food or you die, right? At the extremes, if you can't provide food, you're going to die. Now, in the modern context, as Ed pointed out, to some degree, it's just whether you're supplying your own food or whether food is being bought for you. And there's some details about the quality of the food, that usually the food you get on assistance programs isn't nearly as good as if you have money to spend on buying good food, and it usually is not cooked very well at all. Although, again, there are some details that, like, if you can scrounge together, like, okay, at the utter limits of destitution, you're not going to do anything. If you're not quite at the utter limits of destitution, you can scrounge together a few dollars to buy a, like, 1 pound bag of cinnamon at the Indian food store. And my prices may be off. It's been a little while since I did that, because those things last for a really long time. But you can learn to cook. You can learn to spice uncooked food if you can't afford to cook your food. And you can learn to appreciate the food without the spices, too. Anyway, so there's that part. But more importantly, if you don't have food, you'll die. And here's the thing. If you do have food, you're eventually going to die. And this actually, frankly, does cover the other thing I was thinking of, which is security. Because one of the things is stress. Like, if you have more money, you do not have to worry about as many things. Asterisk, you do, but with lower probability, because you can have plenty of money and everything can go wrong. And, you can get sick with cancer, you can get sick with other stuff that doesn't get cured, you can lose all of your money, and so on. So, like, you're further removed from all the various bad things that can happen to you. People can break into your house and kill you while they're stealing stuff. You can get hit by a bus as you're taking a walk. You can get hit by a meteor even as you're lying in bed. And so the point is, now, these are lower probability events, but saying, like, with more money, the probability of you dying in the near future is unknown, but probably lower. Or, many of the known things we can quantify, as lower probability. So you'll have a lower probability of dying in the near future. So you don't need to stress as much. But here's the thing. You can stress about dying with any non-zero probability of dying. And what's kind of being discussed is, properly speaking, just where the thresholds are. And again, this kind of relates to strength. Now, I'm addressing this in intellectual sense. I've right after grad school and before I got my first job, I was in bad shape. I was depressed and spiraling into debt. massively underemployed and, couldn't even afford, I was borrowing rent off of family. And I was getting, spiraling into credit card debt to feed myself. It was very stressful. And so I do appreciate, being there. At the same time, it is the case, and I can say this in hindsight, that in all cases, you need to make peace with the fact that you're going to die. And you need to make peace with the fact that you might die very soon, because you don't know when you're going to die. And if you do those two things, you need to do this better the more threats that are present to you in the moment. Certainly. So like if you're destitute, more things threaten you, and so you need to make more peace with the fact that you're going to die and the fact that you may well die soon. But you have to do that anyway. And so it is the case not that the money that brings greater security, because you never have actual security. You always could die, and you always are going to die at some point. But the money that brings greater security requires less making peace with the fact that you're going to die and could die at any moment than being destitute does. But that doesn't actually make you happier. That reduces the amount of strength/skill that you need in order to be happy in your circumstance. And there is kind of a critical difference here, which is that if your circumstance can't improve, you can still become happy through putting your work or putting your effort into developing that skill and that strength. Just like if you can't get rid of something heavy, you can develop stronger muscles in order to be able to lift it. Now, this is hard. This is very hard. I'm not in any way saying that it is not very hard. I'm not in any way saying that it is preferable to be poor than to be rich. Although there's some details where there are people who probably would be better off poor than rich because of moral considerations. And interestingly enough, you don't find all that many people who grew up poor and then became richer who don't say that they learned a lot of valuable lessons being poor and are actually kind of glad that they grew up poor, although they're glad because they got out of it. Which is really kind of interesting, actually, if you think about that. Because, Ed is one of those people who, in fact, says that. I've seen him talk about the value of having grown up in the horrible circumstances in which he grew up, that it taught him a lot of valuable lessons, that now that he's out of them, it's a little bit like, the sci-fi stories, the person who grew up on Earth with a heavy gravitational field and moved to Mars with a much lighter gravitational field. And, you've got thick bones and strong muscles, and you're basically Superman. You can jump really high, not because because your muscles are so strong relative to the gravity there. You can jump. There's some story was it John Carter on Mars? I never read it. I was told about it. That had that basic premise. And Earthman, they're a colony on Mars, and the people who grow up on Mars, their bones, muscles, etc., adapt, and they're able to jump about the same height as a person who grew up on Earth is able to jump on Earth, because they never met the sort of resistance that they needed in order to be stronger than that. But a person who grew up on Earth, who moved to Mars, well, their muscles are all calibrated. They had all of that strain that they had to live under. The ability to, jump a foot and a half vertically on Earth required much stronger muscles than it does on Mars. And so they faced all of these challenges when they were young, and then they came to Mars where there just aren't these challenges, and now they're just really good at it. They're like Superman walking around. They can pick up things that normal people can't. They can jump over buildings, whereas normal people can only jump as high as people back on Earth can jump on Earth. And so the people who grew up poor often describe it like this. They're really good at enjoying the things that they have now. They're really good at appreciating the stuff that they had now. And that in itself should tell you something about the relationship of money to happiness. And yeah, superficially, now that they have more money in the better circumstances, they're stronger relative to their circumstances, so they're really good at appreciating things. And yeah. But the very fact that works tells you about what can be accomplished in those bad circumstances. And, there's a reason why people describe Mother Teresa as one of the happiest people they ever met, and she lived in squalid poverty. And the Little Sisters of the Poor lived like that. They, they ate just ate donations, and they lived among the people, and they had, the women had the women in the Little Sisters. Is that the Little Sisters the Poor as Mother Teresa's? I think that's her order. Anyway, the order that she founded. If I'm getting that wrong, I very much apologize to both her order and the order, the Little Sisters the Poor, if those aren't hers. But anyway, they had literally two garments so that they didn't have to be naked while washing the other one. And I mean, like, they washed their clothes just in a bucket. And there are very good reasons, for women to not be naked while they're washing their clothing and waiting for it to dry. And so, yeah, like those they had that. It wasn't theirs; it belonged to the order. And like that's it. And they lived with approximately nothing in the poorest area of India that they could find, and they're happy. And there is a lesson in that. I mean, there are several lessons in that, really. But it's the same lesson as the fact that people who grew up poor and then have stuff have a strong tendency to say, like, A, that they're much happier now that they have, some more wealth, technically speaking, because even the poor these days are wealthy in comparison to the poor of like 500 years ago. And the other thing is wealthy in the sense of like the absolute number of items of, people aren't naked because they can't afford clothing. There's so much clothing, not in America. There's so much clothing thrown off that, like, literally places that accept clothing to give to the poor have to put limits on how much you're allowed to give because we have so much excess clothing. I mean, modern industrialization has made goods so incredibly cheap that everybody is wealthy in comparison to how people used to be centuries ago. Anyway, that said, that same thing that applies, like, to Mother Teresa, because like, oh, well, she's a saint, but, well, yeah, that's kind of the point to some degree. There are supernatural sources of happiness for Mother Teresa, okay? But even on a natural level, it still works, and you can see the fact that this still works even on a natural level, if you really want to make the natural supernatural distinction, which isn't really a very valid one, but yeah, get to that later. But not in this video. Some other video. But rather that the fact that people who grew up poor say that they actually are happy now because of it, and often happier, they find, than other people of the same amount of wealth but didn't grow up poor, because those other people don't know how to appreciate it. Right there, that actually tells you about how, if you really, really think it through, it makes sense why Aristotle was wrong. But Aristotle was wrong. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.